Chapter 16 Persuasion. To get someone to move, you first need to place a more comfortable stone under their feet. When Euron asked Lisa how she could persuade her father, Lisa replied, "He is the king of the Iron Islands, and also your father. Although I've only met him once, I can sense his loneliness. Beside King Coron, there is no wise man who truly understands his perspective. Only arguments, struggles, opposition, and roars. Being in the mountains, one often cannot see the whole picture. Perhaps all that's needed is someone who can calmly dispel the fog, and then the king will see the entire future." Euron laughed and said, "That makes sense." The heavy oak door to the Pike City Patriarch's study was pushed open a crack, and 5-year-old Euron Greyjoy slipped in, quickly closing the door behind him. The room was filled with the strong smell of sea salt and a heavy sense of weariness. Euron Greyjoy stood with his back to the door before the enormous arched window, gazing at the leaden, churning sea outside, his broad shoulders slightly slumped. "Father!" Euron's voice was soft, with a childlike clarity, breaking the heavy silence at just the right moment. Corin didn't turn around, but just gave a low the last syllable of which carried a lingering sense of irritation. Euron went in and carefully closed the door. He didn't approach directly as usual, but stopped beside the huge table in the center of the room, piled high with nautical charts and scrolls. He needed some distance, and he needed a bit of stage. "Mother said, you were angered by Lord Zhuagu and the others again today." Yu Luin didn't use a question, but stated it, his voice carrying a hint of concern that was barely perceptible and appropriate for his age. Corin finally turned around, the deep wrinkles on his face appearing even more pronounced in the dim light, his eyes weary yet sharp. He saw his young son, and in his son's eyes, a calmness beyond his years. This calmness sometimes comforted him, sometimes inexplicably unsettled him. "A bunch of salt-cured old fogies," he growled, slamming his fist on the window frame, making the glass vibrate. "They only see the salted fish and the stolen scrap metal in front of them. They have no idea where the future of the Iron Islands lies." Euron listened quietly, waiting for his father's anger to subside before speaking slowly, his voice still steady. "Father, you are right. The Iron Islands need change." He first affirmed his father's vision, a key point Lisa emphasized. Affirm first, then guide. Corin's gaze fell on the youngest son, scrutinizing him. "Oh, you think so too?" "Yes." Euron took 2 steps forward, his heterochromatic eyes appearing particularly deep in the shadows. "But father, have you ever considered? Does the sea change the shape of the reefs through repeated, violent pounding, or through the silent erosion of the tides year after year?" Corin frowned, clearly not expecting his son to use such a metaphor. Euron didn't pause. He had to keep up the pace. Farmers on the continent don't think about digging up an entire mountain in a day when they cultivate wasteland. They clear a small area first, plant seeds, and wait for them to sprout and be harvested to prove that the land can support people before more people are willing to join in and cultivate a larger area together. He walked to the table and pointed his little finger at the location of the Iron Islands on the nautical chart. "Our Iron Islands are like the toughest wasteland. You want to turn it into a fertile place like the Reach all at once, which is fine. But Uncle Zhuagu and Brother Baron are the kind of people who are used to the wilderness and are afraid of change. If you ask them to put down their axes and pick up their hoes immediately, they will only think you are crazy or betrayed the drowned god." Corin's eyes flickered, as if he was pondering his son's words. "The drowned god bestowed upon us the proverb, 'The dead are not truly dead. They will surely rise again.'" Euron's voice rose slightly, carrying a strange certainty that seemed to resonate with that ancient being. "But the drowned god did not say that the rise must be in the old ways. Perhaps building stronger ships with better iron, acquiring warehouses full of grain with smarter methods, silencing all those who mocked the Iron Islands with greater power. This is the rising momentum that the drowned god truly wants the Ironborn to display in this era. Isn't this a greater display of the drowned god's glory than stealing a few bags of gold or capturing a few slaves?" Corin's breath seemed to catch in his throat for a moment. He had never thought of it from this perspective before. Drowning god. A new method? His sharp gaze was fixed on his infant son. "Father, we don't need to liberate all the slaves immediately, but we can start by selecting a few mines or salt fields in Pike City, right under your nose, and try it out. Give the hardest working and most obedient slave laborers a glimmer of hope. For example, if they work for 5 years without making a mistake or learn a trade, they can become free citizens or even be allocated a small plot of barren land to cultivate themselves. Let them see a future, and they will work even harder than if they were whipped. When the salt production in Pike City really increases and the warehouses are full, won't the lords on the other islands be envious? They will come to you themselves and ask how you did it. The ancient way, paying iron coins, is the glory of our ancestors. To throw it all away at once is like throwing the bones of our forefathers into the sea. Of course, everyone can't accept that, but we can change it. Euron's eyes gleamed with shrewdness. For example, stipulate that longships cannot rob merchant ships flying the flags of the Seven Kingdoms? That would save a lot of trouble. But those pirate dens on the Stepstone Islands, those ships transporting live cargo in Slave Bay, rob them. This isn't betraying the ancient way. It's cleaning up the garbage of the sea. A righteous act that even the drowned god would approve of. The loot will be distributed among the crew, and some will be given to you to buy food, timber, and even to hire good blacksmiths to teach our people. This is called using the blood of our enemies to nourish our roots. The seven gods' cultivators. Euron shook his head slightly. Forced relationships are never sweet. The drowned god has lived in the Iron Islands for thousands of years. He can't be easily dismissed. Rather than letting them land on the island and causing the drowned priests to fly into a rage, why don't we send a few clever drowned apprentices to the Old Town Academy? A reverse approach, taking the initiative. Let them learn how to keep accounts, how to build ships, how to heal. When they return, they will be the best proof of the drowned god's integration with knowledge. The Iron people will be more willing to listen to what they say. This is far more effective than 10 Seven Gods cultivators standing on the dock chanting scriptures. Opening the port is a brilliant idea, Father, Euron said with genuine admiration. But to get ships to dare to come, simply opening the gates isn't enough. We need to convince them that they won't be fishbait once they enter. We can do two things first. First, designate a small safe zone in Pike Harbor, guarded by your most trusted guards. Any Ironborn who dares to draw their weapons in the safe zone will be treated as a traitor to the family. Second, find 1 or 2 merchants who have done salt and iron trade with us a few times and are a bit daring. Give them special protection and extremely low taxes, and even allow them to open a small warehouse in the safe zone. Let them take the message of safe trade in the Iron Islands back with them. Word will spread, and eventually some money-grubbing merchants will be willing to give it a try. Just one ship returning safely and fully loaded is more effective than us shouting, "We've changed our minds 100 times." Euron finished speaking, his small chest rising and falling slightly. Only the crackling of the fireplace and the faint roar of the waves remained in the study. He looked up at his father, his heterochromatic eyes clear and resolute, awaiting his judgment. Colin Greyjoy gazed at his young son for a long time. Some of the weariness seemed to fade from his face, replaced by a deep, complex mix of shock, intrigue, rekindled hope, and an indescribable scrutiny. This child, his thoughts were so clear, so cunning, yet so incisive. The problems he pointed out were precisely where he himself had stumbled and bled. The path he proposed, though slow, seemed more feasible, less likely to provoke a devastating backlash. Corran's voice was a little hoarse. He slowly walked to the desk and sat down, his fingers unconsciously tapping the table. "Did you come up with these yourself? Or did someone teach you?" He asked the key question. "Lysa told me that changing people's hearts is like cooking a pot of soup. If you rush it, it will burn. If you simmer it slowly, it will become flavorful." Her words woke me up, and I thought about it for a very long time afterward. Euron answered honestly. "I want to help you, Father. I don't want to see you so angry with them every day. Nor do I want to see the Iron Islands remain poor forever." "Lysa? That little maid who speaks 7 languages. Corran took a long, deep breath and exhaled heavily, as if to empty the pent-up emotions in his chest. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze once again fixed on the perpetually restless sea outside the window, but this time, there seemed to be something different in his eyes. "Simmering over a low flame." He repeated the words softly, as if chewing on a piece of hard, cured meat, trying to savor a new flavor. "Perhaps it's a little smarter than my old bones crashing into a rock." He looked at Euron, a tired but genuine smile of approval finally appearing on his face. "I'll try this slow-cooked soup." Although King Corran did not make a decision immediately, Euron knew that his father had taken his words to heart with this tacit approval. Just as Euron was about to leave, Corran suddenly said, "Starting tomorrow, you will come with me to the council chamber." Chapter 17 Salt Concubine Discussion. Corran's words, Starting tomorrow, you will come with me to the council chamber. We're like a boulder thrown into a stagnant pool, stirring up 1,000 waves in Euron's heart. The brief silence in the study was broken by this sudden decision. The air seemed to freeze, and even the flickering flames in the fireplace seemed to hold their breath. Euron jerked his head up, his heterochromatic eyes, the left like an abyss swallowing light, the right like ice frozen before a storm, revealing for the first time a pure, childlike astonishment before his father. 5 years old? The council chamber? Even his brother Baron, the heir who at 15 could already brave the storms on a longship, had only recently been allowed to occasionally sit in on such matters. Had his father gone mad? Or did he take his childish words about the reefs and the tides so seriously? Qhorin took in his young son's shock, his weary yet astonished smile deepening, even tinged with a hint of Ironborn-like, almost cruel expectation. What? Scared? He stood up, his tall figure stretching long in the flickering firelight, casting a shadow that almost completely enveloped Euron, exuding an undeniable, reef-like, unyielding authority. Where was that air of authority you had just displayed, discussing the reefs and tides, my little sea monster? He took a step closer, his voice low but each word like a hammer blow. You wanted to help me? You didn't want to see me frustrated by those salt-cured rocks every day? Then come on. See for yourself just how hard these reefs of the Iron Islands really are. Listen for yourself to how many poisoned daggers are hidden in those voices, afraid of change. Just sitting in your study studying maps and pondering the ebb and flow of the tides isn't enough. This was not a discussion but an order. It was a test from the King of the Seastone of the Iron Islands for his heir, though this heir was currently only the second son, a 5-year-old child. Qhorin's eyes were as sharp as Valyrian steel, as if he wanted to cut open Euron's tender skin and dig out the extraordinary wisdom in his soul, along with his disguise, to see what monster or miracle was hidden inside. Euron opened his mouth, his throat feeling as if it were blocked by sea salt, too dry to utter a sound. He could feel the heavy weight behind his father's words. Trust, a test, and an invisible force dragging him completely into the heart of the chilling vortex of power. The council chamber wasn't a training ground covered in white sea salt. There were no crisp sounds of wooden swords clashing, only silent flashes of blades, venomous words, and cold calculations capable of tearing a person apart. He subconsciously clenched his small fists, his nails digging deep into his soft palms, bringing a sharp pain, barely managing to maintain the thin layer of icy composure on his face. Yes, father. He heard his own voice ring out, clear and crisp, yet like a taut bowstring with a barely perceptible tremor. I will watch and listen carefully. Qhorin nodded with satisfaction, as if he had completed a crucial strategic deployment. Very good. Now go back and prepare. Tomorrow, he emphasized, like hammering in a nail. Don't be late. He waved his hand, carrying the salty scent of the sea breeze, and turned back to face the perpetually restless sea outside the window, its dark waves churning in the twilight. To him, this earth-shattering decision seemed as commonplace as ordering a longship to set sail. Euron practically floated away from the study, filled with the smell of tobacco and the weight of pressure. Only the touch of the cold stone walls of the corridor against his slightly flushed cheeks brought his turbulent mind back to reality. Lysa, like a silent shadow, had been quietly waiting in the depths of the corridor's shadows, as if she were an integral part of this ancient stone castle. Her emerald eyes, calm and undisturbed in the dim light, reflected the faint glow of the wall lamp, as if she had foreseen this storm all along. Master! Her voice was still as gentle as the sea breeze brushing over the rocks. He wants me to go to the council chamber tomorrow. Euron's voice was low, carrying a hint of bewilderment that he himself couldn't quite discern, and a secret excitement of being caught in the eye of the storm. A flicker of understanding crossed Lysa's eyes, which was then replaced by a deeper, calmer stillness, like that of an ancient well. The tide surges toward the rocks, and the rocks will eventually reveal their rugged true form, she murmured, as if stating an immutable law of nature. Are you ready? To see, to hear, to be silent. Silence. Euron frowned slightly, puzzled. The eye of the storm is often the quietest place. Lysa bowed slightly, her posture humble yet carrying a strange insight. Before you learn to unleash a storm powerful enough to destroy everything, learn how to steady your small boat amidst towering waves. Observe more, listen more, and think more. Words are sometimes the most useless oars, and may even attract the attention of sharks, especially among a group of people who are used to speaking with tomahawks instead of tongues. Euron silently pondered Lisa's words. Silence, he murmured, the initial shock in his heterochromatic eyes gradually subsiding, replaced by a focused, almost hunter-like calm. Lisa was right. The council chamber was an arena more dangerous than any battlefield. He was still too weak. Rashly wielding the axe of words would only prematurely expose his position, making him the target of all arrows. He needed to be like an octopus among the rocks, concealing himself, observing, learning the cunning etched on the wrinkles of every lord's face, discerning the hidden blades in every seemingly peaceful word, and deciphering the deals concealed behind every meaningful silence. He needed to be, as Lisa had said, the quietest and most lucid point at the center of that storm's vortex. However, this deliberately sought-after quiet was destined to never truly arrive in Piketown on this turbulent night. That day, late at night, the night was as black as ink, so thick it seemed impossible to penetrate, with only the salty sea breeze howling between the cold stone walls of Pike City. In the shadows of the armory's rear window, a small figure clung to the rough wall like a gecko. Through the narrow crack in the window, a scene on the rocky beach below clearly came into Euron's view, the altar of the drowning god. Beren, shirtless, stood in knee-deep water, the icy waves constantly lapping at his taut calf muscles. On his broad chest, a newly tattooed image writhed menacingly in the dim moonlight and flickering torchlight. A longship sailing through the waves, its sails billowing, its hull spewing eerie green flames, its twisted mast constructed of piled-up bones. On either side of the altar, seawater washed over their slender ankles, where two barefoot girls stood. Their once glorious green silk gowns were now completely soaked by the salty seawater, clinging tightly to their young bodies, outlining helpless curves like a second, pale panel. The old priest's voice dragged across the rocks like rusty chains. "Where do you come from?" Yangji City." The tall girl's voice trembled uncontrollably. A few tiny grains of Dornish red sand shimmered faintly in the firelight among the curls of her hair, the last trace of her homeland. "You are dead." The cold iron staff, carrying unquestionable authority, struck the girl's smooth forehead with a heavy blow. A faint hiss of burning flesh and a burnt smell accompanied the sound, leaving a bloody brand symbolizing rebirth. Reborn now, as the wife of the Iron Seed. As the heavy iron staff turned towards the second, smaller girl, Euron's gaze abruptly fixed on her slender neck. A delicate silver chain gleamed coldly in the firelight. It was Lannisport's most renowned, nightingale collar, each exquisite ring engraved with a different name, like the medals of her painful past. The girl seemed to sense the watchful gaze, and just as the staff was about to fall, she abruptly raised her head. Her amber eyes, a gift of the summer island sunshine, were now filled with fear and an almost bestial wariness. Even more chilling was her right eye, clouded by a murky white film, like a punctured fish bladder, reflecting the flickering firelight with deathly stillness. "You are dead." The old priest repeated the action, branding the girl's forehead. "Now you are reborn, as the wife of the Ironborn. Have you seen enough?" Beren's voice, like a cold anchor, exploded in Euron's ears without warning. Before he could even turn around, a tremendous force, carrying the smell of the sea and sweat, suddenly grabbed his collar and roughly yanked him out from behind the window crack where he was hiding. Immediately afterward, a fist carrying a gust of wind slammed into his cheek. "Ugh!" Euron groaned, his small body crashing onto the sharp, pebbly beach below like a kite with a broken string. A strong taste of rust and salty seawater instantly filled his mouth, and half his cheek burned with pain. After a month of confinement, this was the first time the two brothers had seen each other. That punch was Beren's revenge. Although he had held back, it still hurt. "You bastard." Beren's tall figure loomed over them, carrying the damp, chilly scent of the sea. He roughly grabbed Euron by the back of his dark collar, like lifting a stranded fish, and held him facing the altar. "Father gave you permission to peek?" Beren's voice was low, yet like muffled thunder rolling over rocks, each word icy. "King Coron is busy counting the gold coins the Bravos are paying in reparations right now. He doesn't have time to worry about where his clever little son is fooling around. You brat. Open your eyes and see clearly. Ironborn don't go to the market to exchange wool and gold coins for wives. We steal them. That's the salt and iron flowing in Greyjoy's blood." Beside the altar, The old priest was gripping the Dornish girl's chin, forcefully pouring a large bowl of murky, cold, death-laden salt water into her open throat. The girl's futile struggles were drowned out by the sound of the waves, her heart-wrenching coughs and sobs cruelly torn apart by the sea wind. You punched me. Consider it a debt I owe you from the punishment you received last time. Okay. Put me down, I have something to say. Euron calmly patted Baron's hand and said, Brother, father wants me to go to the council chamber tomorrow. The council chamber? Baron grinned, his previously violent laugh freezing on his face as if solidified by ice. He abruptly lowered his head, his hawk-like gaze fixed on Euron's face, his voice even lower, yet like a muffled thunder rumbling in the depths of the clouds before a storm, filled with unbelievable danger. Father! Has he really gone mad? His fingers, gripping Euron's hair, tightened unconsciously, causing a sharp pain. You brat, you can't even lift the lightest longsword, what can you do there? Be a laughingstock for those old foxes, Drogon? Let all the captains of the Iron Islands see that the second son of House Greyjoy is just a brat who can only talk big. Euron spat out a mouthful of bloody saliva, enduring the pain on his face, and forced a nonchalant smile. The council chamber isn't a fighting arena. Do we need to use swords to chop people up? Bullshit. Baron sat bolt upright, his black hair whipping around like seaweed in a storm, his rage intensifying. Your little bit of cleverness might work on a 3-year-old, but the council chamber? It's a den of wolves, a place colder than the altar of the drowned god. Those old bastards. Their veins aren't filled with blood. They're filled with ice and poison. They chew you up, skin and bones, and swallow you whole, not even spitting out the bone fragments, just to laugh at father, to humiliate Greyjoy. His voice, beneath the fury, suddenly carried a barely perceptible hint of anxiety Euron had never heard before. What politics can a 5-year-old understand? What can they discuss? Every word they utter is a knife hidden behind it. Do you even understand? It's all right, actually, Euron said, struggling to steady his suspended body, his voice as calm as possible. Just listening is learning too. The more we observe and listen, the more we'll become lords eventually, and deliberation is also part of learning. He paused, his heterochromatic eyes meeting Baron's burning gaze with a hint of inquiry. Are you worried about me? I'm worried about the Greyjoy family's reputation, Baron immediately retorted like a seal whose tail had been stepped on, his voice rising, but the hand gripping Euron's hair unconsciously loosened its hold slightly. He irritably tossed Euron onto the rubble, then turned and kicked a nearby abandoned empty barrel hard, the barrel tumbling with a hollow thud. Father is putting our dignity, the majesty of the King of the Seastone, on the chopping block for those bastards to beat. He turned his back to Euron, his shoulders heaving with anger, but his voice gradually lowered, carrying a heavy sense of defeat. I'm afraid you ignorant brat, will be terrified by the looks those old men give you. Then all the Iron Islands will laugh at us, saying that Coron's son is a coward who wets his pants at the first sign of trouble. Before his eyes, the scene from 3 years ago flashed uncontrollably. On the training ground paved with white salt, 3-year-old Euron was repeatedly knocked to the ground by a heavy wooden sword. His small body thudded against the hard stone, the purplish-blue bruises starkly visible against the pale surface. Yet, in those damned eyes, one black and one blue, burned a stubborn flame that even Baron found painful. That kid might be annoying, might always say things that were hard to understand, but he was never a coward. Euron chuckled, wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, struggled to his feet, and looked up at Baron's tense profile. That's why I came to find you, dear brother. In the council chamber, are there any rules I should be particularly mindful of? Which lords should I absolutely avoid looking at? What topics are the absolute no-go zones? Teach me, please. What's it to me? Baron interrupted irritably, whirling around with a fierce look that seemed to want to devour Euron. His chest heaved violently, clearly struggling to suppress his surging rage. He glared at Euron, his eyes seeming to pin him to the rocks behind him. After a few breaths, as if using all his strength, he forced out a command, cold as deep-sea iron, through clenched teeth. Quiet, don't say a word. He took a deep breath of the night air, which carried the stench of blood and salt, and added, his voice firm and unwavering, no, it's don't speak. So your mouth shut. Shut up. And also, don't be late. Chapter 18 The Council Chamber. Ding. Council Hall discovered. 10 points awarded. One Piece System. It is Euron's greatest secret weapon. Every time he sets foot in a new location, points are automatically accumulated, and the world before him is clearly unfolded in the form of a map. Explored areas are shown in detail, while unexplored areas are shrouded in a thick black fog, waiting for Euron to light them up with his footsteps. At this moment, the entirety of Pike Island unfolded before Euron's eyes, like an ancient sea chart soaked in salt. The coordinates of the council chamber had just been unlocked, and details began to emerge. The rough stone walls, the hanging sea monster flag, the black stone chair of his father, King Coron, the plundered spoils piled up in the corner. Even the wine stains spilled by the Ironborn leaders while they were drinking were clearly visible. Further afield, unexplored areas remained shrouded in mist. Shipyards, armories, salt fields, iron mines on Old Wake Island, each representing potential points and resources. Points represent power. Euron was not late. Before the dawn had fully dispelled the thick fog among the Pike City rocks, he had already been carefully groomed by the nimble and composed hands of his maid, Lysa. The Greyjoy Krite totem, embroidered in gold thread, shimmered faintly in the dim light on his brand-new, dark green velvet robe, its menacing claws seemingly proclaiming his undeniable presence. He sat upright at the far end of the council table, to the right of the head seat, his small frame ramrod straight, striving to mimic his father's composed demeanor. The old Maester Clygon stood anxiously in the shadows to his left, his thin lips pressed tightly together, his withered fingers nervously fiddling with the chain of his maester's necklace. Lysa, like a deep-sea plant blending into the background, stood silently further to the right, her emerald eyes lowered, as if merely a shadow in the corner. He had arrived too early. His father, King Coron, had not yet arrived. In the empty, cold council chamber, only the crackling of newly added firewood in the fireplace and the whistling of the sea breeze through the cracks in the stone windows could be heard. However, this silence was soon broken. The heavy oak doors were pushed open again and again, carrying the distinctive briny and chilly scents of the different Iron Islands. Lord Dunstan, Earl of Great Wake, strode in with the imposing presence of his island's volcano, his heavy leather boots thumping on the stone floor. Lord Gilmond, Earl of Salthill, had eyes as sinister as a sea eel lurking in the crevices of a reef, and Lord Bellin, Earl of Blackteth, possessed a priestly solemnity, his fingers twirling a string of smooth, succulent beads. Their attendants and representatives took their places on either side. The large council chamber instantly filled with an invisible pressure and the pungent stench of sweat, alcohol, and sea salt. A barrage of gazes, some astonished, some contemptuous, some inquisitive, and some filled with undisguised anger, like cold tentacles, pierced through the flickering light of the dim oil lamp, clinging tightly to the small figure at the end of the long table, dressed in a brand-new sea monster robe. The air seemed to solidify into a thick, viscous seaweed soup. Ha! Dunstan Drow broke the silence first, grabbing the rough ceramic cup in front of him and gulping down a large mouthful of cheap ale, his Adam's apple bobbing loudly as he swallowed. His harsh voice, like sandpaper scraping against rocks, lashed out at Gilmond portly beside him without any politeness. Look at this, letting a baby who hasn't even been weaned for a few years, whose hair hasn't even grown all his hair, sit here? What does he take the Seastone King's council chamber for? A sandcastle for a baby to play with? He deliberately raised his voice to make sure the whole hall could hear, each word like a whip quenched with salt, lashing at Greyjoy's authority. Gilmond portly stroked his sparse stubble, letting out a low, cold laugh, like a sea serpent gliding across damp sand. Not necessarily a bad thing, Dunstan. It'll give everyone here a good look. His sinister gaze swept across the room, finally settling on Euron. What's going on in the head of our patriarch who's so eager to be a reformer? If this brat dares to spout nonsense and make wild claims in this sacred place. Humph. The unfinished sentence was filled with icy expectation and threat. Perron Blacktez, however, seemed out of place. He didn't join in the mockery, but instead solemnly placed a small, polished wooden carving of the drowned god on the table before him. He clasped his hands together, closed his eyes, and whispered, his voice tinged with an almost sorrowful worry. Drowning god, hear the perplexity of your humble servant. Is this truly your will, a sign of new life, or a harbinger of chaos and ominous tides about to engulf the Iron Islands? The child's eyes, one black, one blue, like a torn night and a frozen abyss. They stir unease in the calm sea of my soul. His prayer was more like a declaration, subtly planting a faith-based doubt in the heart of the Lord present. These deliberately suppressed comments, undisguised contempt, and faith-based questioning crashed against Euron's defenses like cold waves. He could feel Maester Clygon's almost tangible anxiety behind him, and he could hear Lysa's barely perceptible, deep-sea-like, steady breathing in the shadows. A silent reminder. Be silent, observe. Is it outrageous for a 5-year-old to enter the council chamber? Euron silently refuted in his heart. His heterochromatic eyes lowered, long eyelashes concealing the turmoil within. His thoughts raced across the long scroll of Westeros's history. The blonde Joffrey I on the Iron Throne in King's Landing, crowned king at the age of 12, turned the 7 kingdoms upside down. Every foolish decision he made was stained with the blood of his people. Lyanna Mormont, the little bear of Bear Island, went to the battlefield at the age of 10, upholding the family motto of standing tall, taking the place of her fallen father and brother in the Mormont council chamber, issuing orders in her tender voice. Robb Stark, the young wolf of the North, raised the direwolf banner at 15, pointing his sword at King's Landing, making even Tywin Lannister suffer on the battlefield. And Winterfell, when the men of House Stark marched south, only a few-year-old Bran Stark remained. Didn't he also sit in the main seat, accompanied by Maester Luwin, and handle disputes in the north? Countless. It's never been uncommon for young figures to appear at the heart of power in Westeros, a land full of legend and cruelty. The only difference is whether they are ruthlessly pushed to the forefront by fate, or, like myself, actively pulled into the eye of the storm by my father. These rebuttals clashed fiercely in Euron's mind, almost bursting out. But he clenched his small fist hidden beneath his sleeve, his nails digging deep into his palm, the pain a reminder of Lysa's admonition, silence. Now was not the time to wield the sword of knowledge. What he needed to do was remain unmoved, like a true reef, letting these malicious waves crash against him. He slightly adjusted his posture, making himself appear more composed, his gaze fixed on the polished table before him, as if the rough wood grain held endless mysteries. Only the slightly taut jawline betrayed that his heart was not entirely calm. The mockery, suspicion, and unease that permeated the council chamber, like a damp, thick fog, had already set a cold and heavy tone for this destined to be extraordinary meeting before King Corran even stepped in. All eyes were fixed on the 5-year-old child who appeared exceptionally small amidst the massive stone chair, yet was strikingly conspicuous by his golden-threaded sea monster robe and heterochromatic eyes. Chapter 19 stirs up a backlash. Inside the council chamber, the embers of mockery had not yet cooled, and whispers of doubt still lingered on the stone walls. Lysa's deep, steady breathing was barely audible behind him, the only anchor in this oppressive sea. Euron could clearly feel the gazes, some cold, some burning, clinging to his back. He calmly met the gaze of the Lord in the hall, neither surprised nor angry. Just as Dunstan Zodu seemed ready to add fuel to the fire, and Gilmund Portly's sinister eyes flashed with calculation, as Perron Blacktez finished reciting the last line of his prayer to the wooden sculpture. The unassuming, heavy oak door next to the main seat, leading to the inner room, slid open silently. Corran Greyjoy's towering figure appeared in the doorway, like a reef suddenly emerging from the sea. He hadn't just arrived. His weathered, sharp eyes, as if polished by the waves, were now calm and still, yet seemed to have taken in everything that had just happened in the council chamber. Every sarcastic remark, every glance, every hint of unease. His face was expressionless, only possessing a deep, abyssal calm that carried an invisible pressure. He strode in, his leather boots making a steady, rhythmic sound on the cold stone floor, each step like a drumbeat striking the hearts of everyone present. He didn't look at anyone, heading straight for the enormous main seat carved from ancient black reef stone, the seat symbolizing the authority of the King of the Sea Stones. The sea monster-patterned leather armor he wore gleamed with a cold, hard sheen in the fireplace light. A deathly silence fell over the council chamber. Even the crackling of the firewood in the fireplace seemed jarring. Dunstan Zod's half-raised wineglass froze in midair. Gilmund Portly's fingers, which had been stroking his chin, stopped, and Perron Blacktez quietly slipped the small wooden carving into his pocket. All eyes, those of awe, discontent, and suspicion, were focused on the ruler of the Iron Islands. Corran sat down on the enormous throne, leaning back slightly, his gaze sweeping over his crew like that of a seasoned captain, or rather, scrutinizing this sea full of reefs. Without any pleasantries, he extended his bony, calloused hand and tapped it 3 times lightly on the smooth, cold stone tabletop. Thump, thump, thump. The sound wasn't loud, but it was like a ship's hammer striking an alarm bell, clearly echoing in the silent hall, announcing the approaching storm. Everyone's here. Let's discuss this. Corrin's voice was deep and calm, yet carried an undeniable penetrating power. Each word was like an anchor sinking to the bottom of the sea, leaving no room for rest. What waves are brewing on each island? The brief silence was broken, like a suppressed tide finding an outlet. Dunstan Drow was the first to strike. He slammed down his wine glass, spilling a few drops onto the table. The biggest wave? The biggest wave is those silk-robed ravens from King's Landing. His voice boomed, filled with undisguised disgust. Those 7 gods' monks, scurrying around the archipelago like sea cockroaches, chanting sermons to fishermen at the docks, preaching to slave laborers at the saltworks. The priests of the drowned god are about to lose their temper. Corrin, you let them land on the island, and now they're going to defile the drowned god's sanctuary. This must be explained. He pointed his thick finger at Corrin, as if the other was the culprit. Gilmund Portly immediately intervened. His voice, unlike Dunstan's, was colder, like a reef hidden beneath the undercurrent. Lord Zhuogu is right. This is indeed a problem. However, the bigger wave is probably that new port in Pike City, built with such difficulty and exhaustion of manpower and resources. A sarcastic smile played on his lips. What a magnificent dock, brand new stone shore, towering lighthouse. But what has it gained besides crashing waves and seabird droppings? Empty. Utterly empty. He deliberately enunciated each word, each syllable like an icicle piercing Corrin's reform plan. Not a single merchant ship flying the flags of the 7 nations dares to dock. Those merchants would rather take the long way to Seagull Town than approach the coastline of our Iron Islands. What use is this pile of stones except for wasting iron or in labor? Lord Corrin, your open doors are not even looked at by those outside. Waves. Bellin Black's voice carried a heavy, compassionate tone. He spoke slowly, his gaze sweeping over the lords present. My lords, don't you feel the true chill? Winter is coming. He spread his hands, as if embracing the invisible cold. The Iron Islands are barren, and our food has always been purchased from outside or paid in iron money. How long can the grain reserves in Pike City last? 2 months? 3 months? And you? He looked at Corrin, his eyes filled with the worry of a believer. You want to raise the salt tax? Salt is one of the foundations of our Ironborn's survival. Raising the salt tax is like taking away the last bit of saltiness that sustains the poor fishermen and salt workers. It will extinguish the fires on the islands even faster. The drowned god gave us salt to keep us alive, not to drive his people to their doom. He had barely finished speaking when another representative from Old Wake Island, a captain with a gaunt face and hawk-like eyes, stood up abruptly, his voice like a blade scraping through bone. Lord Blacktez has hit the nail on the head. Food, survival, these are the most deadly waves. Lord Corrin, can your merchant ships, ports, and monks' dreams fill the children's stomachs? Can they withstand the harsh winter winds? He surveyed his surroundings, his eyes burning with a primal, fanatical light. The ancient way. Only by returning to the ancient way, let our longships set sail again. Let our warriors grip their battle axes once more. Go to the rich southern coast to pay the iron money. Go and reclaim our winter food. Go and reclaim the Ironborn's lost glory. This is the Ironborn's way, recognized by the drowned god. This is the anchor that solves all problems. Yes, let's return to the ancient path. Paying iron money is the right way. Steal their grain to get through the winter. Several more radical captains and spokespeople from remote islands immediately echoed his sentiments, and the council chamber was instantly filled with a fanatical, plunder-hungry atmosphere. The calls for a return to the ancient road surged like a hungry tsunami, violently assaulting Corrin and the reform direction he represented. Corrin sat upright on the rocky throne, his face ashen, his fingers tapping unconsciously on the cold tabletop, as if measuring the depth and power of the surging waves. His gaze was deep and unreadable. Euron, seated at the very end, remained frozen in place. His small body, encased in his new monstrous robe, resembled a miniature reef adrift in a raging sea. His taut jawline seemed to relax slightly when his father appeared. Now, amidst the Lord's heated arguments and fervent cries of return to the ancient road, his heterochromatic pupils, one like an abyss swallowing all light, the other an icy blue frozen by the storm, were unusually bright and focused. He imprinted every face contorted with anger, anxiety, and fanaticism, every cry filled with self-interest, faith, and the will to survive, like the most precise nautical chart, deeply into his mind. Lisa's admonition echoed in his heart. Silence. Observation. In the eye of the storm, only absolute clarity can ensure survival. Like a detached chronicler, he silently gathered first-hand intelligence from this power struggle, drawing a crucial map of the hidden reefs for his future voyage. Chapter 20 New Rules for the Ancient Road. Dunstan Zod's roar, Gilmond Portly's cold irony, Perron Blacks's heavy worries, and the fervent cry of returning to the ancient road collided violently in the cold council chamber like several undercurrents that flowed in different directions but were equally turbulent, almost drowning Coron and his rocky throne. However, Corin Greyjoy remained seated, his fingers still rhythmically tapping on the cold, rocky table. The soft thump, thump, sound strangely maintained a serene stillness amidst the cacophony. When the last Old Wake Island representative, driven by a plundering frenzy, sat down, leaving only heavy breathing and the restless crackling of the fireplace in the hall, Corin finally raised his eyelids. His gaze, like two spears forged from the icy sea, pierced precisely at Dunstan Zodu. 7 divine cultists? Corin's voice wasn't loud, but it carried a sharpness that cut through the waves. They are preachers, nothing more. Which of the Iron Islands laws, the ancient laws etched on the reefs, states no one may preach under the drowned god? His gaze swept across the room, each word like an iron nail driven into wood. Drowning gods cultists can also set sail to the ports and towns of the 7 kingdoms to spread the drowned god's teachings. That's the Ironblood's magnanimity. Don't like those in silk robes. A cold smile curled at the corner of his lips. Close your ears, turn away. But Corin's voice suddenly rose, booming like thunder, shaking the hall. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze like a tangible shackle, fixed on Dunstan Dragoon's flushed face, and sweeping over every lord who might harbor ill intentions. Who dares to lay a finger on them, who dares to pour a drop of seawater on them in disrespect? I, Corin Greyjoy, swear in the name of the King of the Seastone. He slammed his fist heavily on the table, making a dull thud like cannon fire. I will personally hang that fool on the highest black reef in Pike City. Let the sea breeze and seagulls peck at his corpse. Let everyone see the consequences of disobeying my orders and defiling the laws of the Iron Islands. This blatant, bloodthirsty threat, like the coldest frost, instantly froze the anger on Dunstan Zogu's face and the menacing glint in the eyes of some captains. The air seemed to solidify, leaving only heavy breathing. Baron Blacktez opened his mouth, seemingly wanting to argue from a religious perspective, but under Corin's unquestionable, sea-god-like gaze, he ultimately lowered his head silently. Corin's gaze shifted to Gilmond Portly, the chilling pressure still lingering. The harbor? Empty. He chuckled, a certain confidence that seemed to foresee the future. Open your salted eyes and look further down the horizon. I've sent ravens to contact the Prince of Dorne, the Duke of Dragonstone, old friends who traded with us Iron Islands during those chaotic years, even fought alongside us. Reputation takes time to build, Gilmond, like fine wine. Trust, he surveyed the crowd, his gaze sharp, is not something you smash open and steal, but something you slowly forge through honest trade and safe dealings, like waves washing over rocks. One day, our docks will be full of ships, but not today. Patience is another weapon the Ironborn used to survive the storms. He paused, his gaze falling on the worried Balon Blacktees, and the captains shouting, "The ancient road!" His tone softened slightly, yet still carried the decisiveness of a ruler. Food? Timber? The chill of winter is indeed creeping closer. He acknowledged the harsh reality. Next month, my messengers will set sail north, carrying iron and salt from the Iron Islands, to Winterfell to meet Lord Rickard Stark, southward, to Highgarden to meet Lord Mace Tyrell. We will trade our produce for winter's grain and timber for building ships. This is the way to survive. Finally, his gaze, like a heavy anchor, fell back on those eyes that still burned with the desire to plunder. His voice became low and heavy with the weight of history. The ancient road, paying iron coins. He slowly uttered these words, as if chewing a piece of bitter pickled meat. I know it's the salt and rust flowing in my blood. I admit, perhaps I was too hasty in trying to cut it off with one stroke. This rare, almost compromising admission instantly ignited a spark of hope in the eyes of Dunstan Zogu and others. However, Corrin's next words were like a bucket of ice water, precisely extinguishing that flame. But Corrin's voice became resolute again, carrying the grand imprint of Aegon's conquest era. Remember the War of Conquest. Remember the Dragonfire of Harrenhal. Remember the crown offered by Torrhen Greyjoy. When Aegon I pacified the Iron Islands, he sat atop a dragon and declared, "From this day forward, within the Seven Kingdoms, the Ironborn's tradition of plundering is illegal. Those who violate it will be consumed by dragonfire." He abruptly stood up, his tall figure elongated in the firelight, like an insurmountable rocky barrier. His imposing gaze swept over each lord. "The iron law established by Aegon I remains the cornerstone of the Seven Kingdoms. The Iron Throne still stands. The dragons of House Targaryen may be hidden, but their power remains. I, Corryn Greyjoy, as the Seastone King who submits to the Iron Throne, will not, and absolutely will not, allow you to violate this iron law and drag the Iron Islands back into the abyss of destruction." A deathly silence fell over the council chamber, broken only by Corryn's booming voice echoing through the stone walls. "Therefore, the ancient road may be traversed, but only outside the seas designated by Aegon I. Ships of the Seven Kingdoms, those flying the flags of any lord, any castle, are our neighbors, our potential trading partners. Absolutely not to touch them." He spoke each word with the force of a hammer blow, each syllable a brand. "Your battle axes and longships, your iron treasures, can only be pointed at the pirate dens of the Stepstone Islands, the slave ships of Slaver's Bay carrying live animals, the remote islands and trade routes of the Summer Sea that do not belong to any kingdom, the merchant ships of the free trade city-states, overflowing with wealth but lacking a powerful fleet for protection. These places are yours to enjoy. Use the blood and goods of your enemies to strengthen the Iron Islands. This is my decision. New rules for the ancient road." Corryn sat down again, leaning back in his cold, reef-like chair, his eyes weary yet sharp as ever. "It's not about abandoning the ancient road, but about tying it with the reins of wisdom, so that it can nourish the Ironborn without attracting the devastating dragonfire. Who agrees? Who disagrees?" With that last sentence, his gaze once again sharpened like a drawn blade, slowly sweeping across the faces of every lord present, awaiting a new storm or temporary submission. At the end of the long table, Euron remained silent. His heterochromatic eyes gleamed with a brighter, more complex light under his father's declaration of a new order. A declaration that combined ruthless threats with a glimmer of compromise. He saw his father's tough stance, and also his pragmatic political wisdom, a difficult but potentially viable path between ironclad rules and the traditions of the people. Lysa's strategy of silence allowed him, like a shrewd chess player, to observe the subtle tremors in this power game caused by his father's move. The island lords shouted in unison, "We obey your will, King Corran." Corran waved his hand and said, "All right, if there's nothing else, everyone can leave."